Hey guys, welcome to Mystifying Miracles. The story I'm going to talk about today begins with a young lady by the name of Ruth Biskupski. She finds herself at the top of this steep embankment. She's bruised, she's bloodied, she's confused, and she's wondering, how on earth did I get up here? Even to this day, Ruth says she doesn't remember climbing that hill. I'm going to get into all the specifics, so stay tuned. Ruth was a vibrant, ecstatic 16-year-old girl. She had just bought her first car, and days prior to this, she had paid $200 for a very old Toyota. But it didn't matter how old it was or maybe junky it looked. Who cared? It was her very first car. Now, her father was kind of iffy on it because it was so old. He just didn't want his young daughter, getting stranded or anything like that. He wanted something safe. But Ruth was able to talk him into it. That morning, she was getting up early because she was going to travel to her boyfriend, Bob's house. He was going to install some new speakers into the old car for her. So as Ruth is walking out the front door that morning, she remembers her mother saying, "Be careful, honey. I'll be praying for you." So Ruth gets in her car, and she remembers having thoughts as she's getting in her car of, why did my mom say that? Why do I need the extra prayers? I'm a careful driver. I'm an excellent driver. I know all the laws. Kind of like a teenager would do to their parent. Well, Ruth's boyfriend, Bob, he lived 35 miles away in a small town at the very top of this mountain in a town called Colburn. So it was going to be a little bit of a trek, but no worries. Ruth was actually excited. She enjoyed the drive. As she remembers that morning driving there, beautiful scenery. It was just a nice, pleasant day. Driving up the mountain, she remembers the road itself curving around the mountain as it went, hugging the mountain pretty tightly. But every so often, there were these large drop-offs that looked kind of, spooky or a little bit treacherous, I guess you could say. Well, she gets to Bob's. He installs the speakers, and then Bob has to get to work, to his job, so he has to leave fairly quickly. Now, that day at Bob's, Bob had a brother, and his brother had some friends over. And so they were asking Ruth, hey, when you leave later, can we catch a ride down the mountain into the town, into Grand Junction? And Ruth thought, okay, sure, why not? She did end up having to wait around a while so that they could gather their things and get ready. And when Bob's brother and his friends were finally with it and ready to go, they tell Ruth that, "Oh, I'm so sorry, we changed our mind. We don't need that ride. We're not going to go into town after all." Ruth says she remembers being quite perturbed in her mind because she waited around for them. She could have gone on a long time ago. But what could you do? She also says, though, that their decision not to go that morning was a great decision because it ended up saving their lives, which I'll get into. And unbeknownst to Ruth, at that point in time, it looked as if her mother's prayers that morning were already making a difference. So Ruth leaves Bob's house. Shortly right after she's leaving, it begins to rain, and it starts raining quite heavily. There weren't many people on the road that day due to it being a mountain, small town, but also now it's raining, so she remembers not seeing many vehicles. Well, as she's driving, Ruth says her car starts pulling to the right just a little bit, and she chalked it up to, well, it's raining, the wet roads. So she tries to be a little more careful. Right after that happens, she hears a clunk. And then her car veers quite abruptly and sharply to the right again. But worse this time, Ruth is trying to regain control when she hears the clunk noise again. This time, it sends her car really sharp to the right and unfortunately over one of the steep embankments off the mountain. Her car rolled and rolled and rolled. Ruth says she has no recollection how many times it rolled. All she remembers is seeing sky, grass, over and over again. And as she closes her eyes tight, she's bracing for impact. Once the car finally comes to a rest and Ruth opens her eyes, she's hanging upside down, held in to her seat only by the seatbelt. The car itself had landed upside down into a small stream of water. As she's looking, towards the roof of the car upside down, she sees it's starting to get covered with water. She starts to smell gasoline, and that's when she realizes, okay, I gotta get out of here and fast. She looks around and she sees that her roof was crushed into the back window. So that wasn't going to be an option. Where her side windows in the back had been was now just twisted metal. So that wasn't an option. Her passenger frame window was also crushed, blocking any route of escape. As she starts to smell the gasoline quite strong at this point, she's now becoming scared. She thinks to herself, oh my gosh, no one else was on the road. No one's going to know where I am, that I went over that hill or embankment. So she knows it's up to her to get herself out. She struggles to unbuckle her seatbelt. She gets it undone, and of course, she's upside down. So when she does, she hits the roof of the car and hits her head pretty hard. She now can get a better look of everything because she's not upside down. So she looks and sees that the driver's window, it's smashed in almost like a letter V. And so she sees a small section. She thinks, I think I might can squirm through it. And of course, there were no other options, so she was going to have to try. In order to do that, she'd have to punch out the window. So she does. She then starts with her head and her shoulders first as she tries and tries to squirm out of that small opening. Unfortunately, Ruth gets stuck. She says she struggled and struggled for what seemed like a lifetime. She then starts praying to God, please, Lord, I need help. Please send help. No sooner than she ends that prayer. In fact, I think this, if I remember correctly, the story said she was in the midst of praying when immediately she feels a pair of strong hands grabbing onto hers because, she's not all the way out of that spot yet. They begin to pull her. Now, she didn't mention seeing anybody, but she feels the hands, and so they're pulling. Then she begins to feel other hands pushing her from behind. She said eventually her body popped out of that little area, and she described it as it probably looked like a cork popping off of a wine bottle or something because she shot out of it so fast. She remembers thinking in her head, as she's trying to get herself up off the ground, she's thinking, oh man, thank goodness there were rescuers that came. I'm so blessed, She starts looking around though, and there's no one there. She's been through a traumatic thing too at the time, so you got to take that into account. But she sees no one, so she's wondering, wait a second, who pulled me and pushed me? She was just thankful she was out, finally. But she also remembers thinking and dreading having to climb all the way up that steep embankment. How was she going to do that alone? And the next thing she knows, Ruth says right after those thoughts, she immediately finds herself at the top of this embankment. And she has no recollection of how it happened or, remembering the process of getting up there. It just was 1 second down there. The next second, she's standing at the top of the embankment. As she's standing there confused, rightfully so, she says a car comes. It's driving down the mountain. It sees her, pulls over, and begins to help. The driver of the car happened to be a nurse. So she starts tending to Ruth and wrapping her in blankets. And she had her son with her, so he takes his mother's car to go get help. As, of course, this was before cell phones. The EMTs get there, and they get her in the ambulance, and on the way to the hospital, they begin cleaning her up because blood was everywhere. So they're trying to clean her up and all that. And once they do, here is another wow in the story. There was not one cut, scrape, or wound on Ruth's body. Ruth said, how could this be? That car rolled over and over, and in the process, she remembers glass flying everywhere, metal crunching. How could she not have one wound, especially when she was all bloodied? Ruth had also punched out that driver's window to try to squirm through that spot, yet there was no broken skin or injuries on her hand. She said it was baffling to everyone. No one could come up with anything like what is going on. When she was evaluated at the hospital, she said she had one thing, and that was a bump on her head. And that was from when she undid the seatbelt, fell because the car upside down, and hit her head on the roof. So because no injuries or anything they could find other than the bump, she was discharged from the hospital that very day. Soon thereafter, her dad went to go try to find the car so that he could hire a tow truck to get it out of there. But he looked for what was forever, couldn't find it. So he actually had to get the tow driver to come help. They search a whole day and they cannot find it. But they finally do. Reason being, it was so hard to find, there were so many trees in the area that were kind of camouflaging it. Plus, with the few days that had passed, the car now was half covered in water in that stream. But they did finally find it. When the car was evaluated, took in to see, what caused this accident, it was found that while she was driving, her back axle broke off near the right tire. So that was that clunk, and then it made her car veer off to the right. Ruth says that after all this happened, she didn't talk about it forever, not with anyone. And the reason being, she was so puzzled. Like, what would she say? Because she didn't want to look crazy, I'm sure, She didn't know who helped her that day. She didn't see who pushed and pulled her out of that vehicle. She didn't see who helped her get to the top of the embankment. What can you say? She finally, though, throughout the years, she came to the conclusion that the only explanation is it was her guardian angels hard at work. She says she knows it had to have been those guardian angels who pulled her out, pushed her out. Not only that, though, healed her wounds. There's no other explanation for all the blood and no wounds. So she thinks they also healed her wounds and got her to the top of the embankment. All in all, Ruth knows she was never alone before or after that wreck. That Jesus, he was watching the whole time. And funny thing, Ruth, many years have passed. Ruth had her own kids, and she says, it's funny because she always catches herself. Every time her children leave the house, she tells them, "Be careful, honey. I'm praying for you." The exact thing her very mother always told her. What an incredible story. I hope it was a blessing to you guys to hear it. And thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your prayers and your support. I'm just really blessed. So thank you. I'm going to see you guys for the next one.